Okay, guys, interesting video on the potential collapse of civilization. And this is interesting because it's so multifaceted, because this analysis is so multivariable. There are threats that we're facing on every single side of analysis. There's economics, but there's also cultural, and cultural can be broken down into all the objections to that which holds up Western civilization, being reason, rationality, individual identity, meritocracy, the idea that you can self-better yourself, individualism, everything that is associated with the values that founded America. And of course, conversely, the objections to those values that are rooted in Marxist resentment we see voiced by the far left entities like H3 or Hassan or any other, fringe communist person that hates themselves and is working to destroy civilization. We see this also in the opposition to free speech that Elon Musk is platforming for everyone to see, as they object to not only free speech, but Elon Musk as a person who is probably doing more for the good of humanity than any other human if we use objective measurements. But again, objectivity is something that the postmodernist Marxists detest to begin with. Let's listen to this conversation.
You get the sense as you travel the country, talk to people, speak, that we're on it feels like we're on the cusp of chaos.
I think we're on the cusp of something. I'd like to think of it as a revolution, in a positive sense of that word.
It's very clear, but what's even more interesting than that being obvious is how many people are sheep, how many people are still asleep and are completely oblivious to what's going on. How many people are either refusing to acknowledge the war that is currently taking place for the future of humanity in terms of the war against the woke mind virus, and the people that there's something deficient about their ability to confront problems, because that's the only reason you at this point in 2024 would be unable to realize what's happening around you. That is concerning.
I think that, I try to be an optimist at times.
You feel like this is...
Oh, there's something going on.
Yeah.
I think we're like in a 1775.
It's a war against the woke mind virus. We have to defeat the scourge of Marxism. The resentment and hatred for humanity itself.
Spring of 1776 moment in this country, actually. I think that people are hungry. Now, the form I want to see it play out in is reviving those shared ideals that unite us, that set the nation into motion in 1776.
And if we're ambitious, hopefully a derivative of those values that is even more pristine and grandiose.
I think are innate to our nature as human beings, as Americans. I think that there's a hunger for a revival of those ideals. That's where we are, but there's a lot of ways that energy could go. The way I would like to play my small role in helping channel that energy.
Something you need to understand about the woke mind virus leftist perspective is that your energy has very few outlets to disperse itself because your worldview is so narrow and perverted. If you only believe that there is such thing as power and that power is the only thing that defines relationships between people, then the way you exercise your energy can only be in terms of power, meaning tyrannizing someone, breaking something, taking something from someone, hurting somebody, because those are all expressions of power. But if your worldview is not that of a dogmatic, narrow-minded leftist, you can realize I can create something, I can engage in meritocracy, I can believe in myself, I can, as an individual, strive forward and embrace the hypothetical good that I could create if I took on responsibility for my life. Those are completely different worldviews. Those are different dichotomies, and depending on what we choose to do, what individuals choose to do, whether or not they acknowledge that they're individuals, will define the future of America.
It's not all going to be done by the U.S. president, but there's a role to play, is to channel that energy towards a positive revival of that which unites us across our diverse attributes or divides. But if it doesn't go that way, there's a dam that's going to break and the river's going to go somewhere. I hope it leads towards a national revival rather than, other places where this could go.
America hopefully will last at least 3 or 4 more centuries, at least, hopefully a millennia, right? But we have a lot of work to do to beat this woke mind virus.
How concerned are you about a real economic reset in the next year?
Quite concerned.
And here we see the economic variables, which I touched on, but the interest rates are at an all-time high. The national debt is going to exceed, the payments on the national debt is going to exceed our defense budget, which is the largest thing we spend our money on. And there are a lot of other issues, like banks aren't collecting on their loans very well, and that's a big problem, because when people start realizing that, then faith in the system, the economic system, starts to decrease. And of course, degenerate, insane people that are possessed by the resentment of Marx want to see everything burn. And so if they get an opportunity to, you could say, compound the troubles of the population, they will do so and call themselves good people while they burn things down. This is the inversion of morality that you so often see in their broken, depraved ideology.
I think that 2024 is going to be a year where it's not going to take a lot of guts for me to make this prediction, because I'll tell you why it's easy to make. We're on the cusp of a major economic downturn next year.
Right.
We live under conditions of a deeply inverted yield curve. I mean, these are topics that may put people to sleep, and so we don't have to
Can you explain
get
what that
into
means?
it. Yeah, I mean, it's basically you would expect in the long run, right? Long run interest rates on long run bonds are higher compared to interest rates on short run bonds, because there would be higher risk of being repaid back. That's how things are supposed to work.
People aren't betting that the future is going to be good, basically.
There are a wide range of factors that can occasionally cause that to tilt in the other direction. We're in one of those conditions right now, where the interest rates on short-term bonds are significantly higher than they are on long-run bonds. And every time that's happened in the last 40 years, that has predicted a recession that followed in the year or so that came later. And there's lots of complicated reasons for why, and economists can debate it, which is why we're, I think, in the calm before the storm. Biden will put up low unemployment numbers. Well, that misses the point that we have a deeper structural deficiency, where our real problem is there are twice as many jobs open as there are people looking for work.
Gosh, Vivek is so competent. And for those of you who are wondering why this is Vivek, it's partly just because he's on Tucker Carlson talking about these issues in high resolution. And also it's because he is the most competent person on the debate stage, besides Trump, who's not on the debate stage. And I think it's completely undeniable. Vivek should be a future president.
Right.
That's the actual deeper structural failure as it relates to the labor market.
People have stopped looking for work.
Stop looking for work, absolutely. I mean, people are being paid more, or have been habituated more, to staying at home than to go to work. People also don't have the skill sets required to actually show up to work, because they have four-year college degrees that were subsidized by the U.S. Department of Education, without actually having the skill sets that many employers badly need in order to grow their business.
Right. The institutions of higher learning at this point are designed to indoctrinate people into the left-wing ideology. I experienced it firsthand, and that's why I had to leave college, because it was so absurd and antithetical to learning and improving yourself. They are teaching people gender studies. They are teaching people woke ideology. They are teaching people to hate progress and meritocracy and what they construe as the patriarchy and colonization. They are teaching people resentment above all else. And resentment is what breeds Marxism. Resentment is the lifeblood of Marxism. And that is what has killed north of 60 million people in the communist dictatorships that have existed under Marxism.
So whether it's a big business or a small one, the inflation numbers, they'll point to saying, hey, the rate of inflation's coming down. Inflation's cumulative. Things are still 16, 20% more expensive than they were in 2020, and wages have not gone up in the same way over the same period. Structural issues with our economy. I mean, the national debt, interest payments are going to be the biggest portion and line item of the federal budget very soon. But I think that short-term numbers that we look at right now belie the reality that we're going to have a reckoning. I think that reckoning is likely going to, the timing of these things is hard to predict, but I think that likely reckoning 2024 could be a pretty good prediction for when that's coming.
But that's not just an economic story. I mean, people have psychologically, I think, a very hard time moving backward.
Yes.
Right? It's one thing to be poor. It's another thing to be poor having been rich.
Yes.
Very hard for people to metabolize that. Mm-hmm. And so if that happens to hundreds of millions of people at the same time, people get radical.
Especially against the backdrop of already having deep distrust.
Right.
And resentment. They're already being taught resentment in the schools, being taught to hate capitalism, hate the patriarchy. Those are the same type of people that I mentioned earlier that want to dance in the flames of civilization. They're losers. They are experiencing deep despair in their hearts and minds because they don't believe in themselves. They don't believe that they even exist. You're told in Marxism that your only identity is to be had in group membership and group adherence to their ideology. You don't even exist as an individual according to them.
In my opinion, appropriately deep distrust in our existing institutions, including the government in this country. And so I think there are two ways this could break. Right? Sometimes you go through hardship and you're strengthened by that hardship. I'm just thinking about it as an individual in my life. Like I've gone through a hardship in my life. My father's been through hardship. In each of those cases, that led us to become stronger for having gone through that and did things that we otherwise would have never done, created things in the world that otherwise would have never existed.
That's genetics, that's your environment, but that's also the way you look at yourself. And I won't even say the way you look at the world, because the way you look at yourself defines the way you look at the world. If you think you are a locus for potential, an individual identity that can change the world by taking on responsibility and therefore transcend the suffering and chaos that Marxists say, they say implicitly in their compliance with nihilism that it's all for nothing and it doesn't matter, and therefore we can substantiate our power-based tyranny to achieve our utopia. When you realize that that's a false story, that it's a lie, that it's actually perverse authoritarian lie, then then you're saved. You're saved from their clutches. You're saved from being a destroyed human, like you see these anonymous anime profile people on Twitter saying that Lenin was a good person.